legacy IAM systems to modern IAM systems. A bit of a diverse crowd. So up here we have, actually I'll let you introduce yourself first, and then we can kind of go right to left.
My name's Art Condellis. I work for the Aerospace Corporation. I've done identity management for a number of years now, so happy to share my road here and get your guys' thoughts on what we're doing.
My name is Summer Stedham. I've been doing identity management since the late 90s. I was the head of a small team that did identity management. We have now grown that team out, and we have a new lead for identity management, and I've taken over a directorship position in our infrastructure engineering group.
John Hoagland with Optum or United Health, depending which brand you know us by. We got a team of about 120 people that work in the IAM space, and 40 specifically that work in the web access management space.
Excellent. So the three areas that I mentioned before, we have two areas represented here today. So kind of legacy access management as well as legacy directory solutions. So we'll kind of go through some questions, and if there's questions from the audience, feel free to raise your hand. We can kind of go through as they come in. So starting off, what did you migrate from, and kind of what was the last straw in the modernization decision? You can start, Art, if you want.
Well, we migrated from, anybody remember Oblix? Yeah, there you go. Oblix, Oracle Access Manager, to Ping Access for our web access management solution. So we had to migrate because our Oblix, or I should call it Oblix, Oracle Access Manager 10 release works off of web gates, these agents that get installed on the web server. And these web gates weren't supporting the newer web servers that were coming out that we needed to support. So we needed to get off of that as soon as we can, because all these developers are coming up with different web servers and we couldn't support them anymore. So we needed a solution that would support all the newer web servers, or not give us a different way to do web access management without having to rely on what web server they're running, what application server they're running, and that kind of stuff.
So what we started off with was way back in the day, iPlanet directory server. Any of you guys remember that? Then it's kind of been bought out and bought out and bought out. Eventually, was the Oracle Directory Server Enterprise Edition. That's when we decided to switch over to the Ping directory. We were looking for a couple different things. It still had to have retro changelog support because we had a lot of business dynamic capability built into that. And the other thing is we were looking for something that was highly scriptable, something that we could actually have a command line interface to, and something that we could actually then build an entire deployment, reconfigured on the fly. Scriptability was an important key, and we just really weren't getting that. And then obviously the Oracle acquisition was uncomfortable, to say the least. So we found a better relationship over with Ping.
Okay. We're going through a modernization in a couple spaces. So when we go look at it from the product space, all the way out to web protection, we're transitioning from SiteMinder to Ping Access. And to be honest, we're actually trying to move even from an agent or a proxy architecture to more of an OpenID Connect, something that's more cloud-friendly overall, kind of that mix of on-prem, hybrid, and cloud. We're going through an adaptive authentication or risk-based authentication transition between a couple of products, RSA and CA. And to be honest, we're looking actually for a cloud-enabled product that will transition next year. And then, like a lot of other folks, LDAP is the basis of all of our stuff behind the scenes. We've gone through, Sun and Oracle DSEE, and we're in a transition to Unbound Directory. And for us, a lot of this, it's a balance between what are you trying to do from an IT and business point of view. So from an IT point of view, we're trying to keep the lights on, right? It's about how many nines can we deliver. When you look at the business side around it, it's about agility, capability, availability. So trying to balance all those factors out.
Great, thanks. So next up, when you were looking for a new solution, kind of after that straw broke the camel's back, what were some of the requirements you were looking for in a new solution? So I know, Summer, you touched on some of the command line interface things. John, you talked about some of the flexibility that would be provided. So I'm curious, maybe the top 2 or 3 things you were looking for in a new solution.
Yeah, for us, availability is number one. Got to keep the lights on. We're an identity as a service provider in the healthcare space. So ultimately for us, for SiteMinder, it was around availability and the fact that the architecture, while it was a great architecture in its day 8 or 9 years ago, wasn't very modern, wasn't very open. We were having availability challenges with it. We have 2,000 agents that are deployed. We support today internally, my team supports 1,500 servers just to run our identity services. We're a Fortune 6 company, so for us, we have paying external customers in addition to our captive internal customers. Availability was number one. And then number two, we wanted a modern platform that was delivering new features fairly quickly. You know, most of us big companies are fairly glacial at how we move, and the business complains about our agility. We have that challenge with our vendors. We want something that was open standards, flexible, and a fair amount of capabilities on a fairly quick refresh cycle.
Yeah, I want to kind of add in onto that standards compliant and also the standards enforcement aspect. And that's one of the things that I was really amazed about is how many things that were kicked up in the install where we weren't quite standards compliant. Thought we were, really weren't. And so the install just kind of popped through and said, hey, look, do you realize that your schema is out of compliant here? Do you see that, you know, these attributes that you've selected for your custom attributes, the string data inside isn't matching up? So a lot of those things kicked back, and we were able to kind of adjust our best practices, adjust the way we were doing our business to make sure that we were cleaning it up, and that not only did we think we were standards compliant, but there was the enforcement to ensure that we were. Some of the new requirements that were posted around is, at the time, this was a couple years back, so we've been ping using Unbound ID directory server for the last 4 years now. But SCIM was coming around. That was one of the big important improvements. That's one of the things that proved to us that it was the future-driven aspect. That the customer support, it wasn't like, you know, trying to rely on something, but where, you know, looking at web pages, it was a big move to us to something that was more of kind of an open source community-driven thing. In higher ed, we're really open source driven. But we were really pleased with the customer support to be able to go in and ask really, really technical questions like, I compared your source to the open source equivalent. I think you have a problem with your branching code here. Let's talk tech. And be able to get a patch out, you know, literally within an hour. We put in a ticket sometimes 5 o'clock p.m. on a Friday night, and by 7 o'clock that same night, we've got a patch that we can throw through test and eventually test out to production, you know, potentially by a Sunday. Depending on your load and everything else. So I was really pleased with that, and that's one of the things that was a really important requirement that we were gathering at the first place, is we could be really flexible, we could really get the needs that we needed to when questions popped up answered fast, and then making sure that it was the future driven and the standards compliance was what topped it off for us.
Yeah, we had pretty much the same requirements as they said, but one was web access management. We wanted to make it more invisible. We didn't want people to see the login screens that people were seeing. So with ping access, it kind of gave us that option to make it more invisible to the end user, make it easier for them to use and maneuver between the applications faster and quicker.
Great. So it sounds like standards driven, standards compliant, and availability were pretty key in all of those. So obviously those are some of your requirements. I'm curious, when you were looking at vendors, you know, it could be any vendor, what made their solution stand out to you as maybe unique, or, you know, if it was proprietary versus open source, you know, what were some really cool things that you saw when you were looking for a new solution?
Yeah, from an Optum point of view or United Health point of view, I drive the IT primarily in the U.S., but we're a worldwide company, right? Big South American footprint, doing stuff in Australia, Asia Pac, Europe. So as we're looking at it, you know, solutions that work for us that can also extend to that worldwide footprint. But as we're going out and trying to solve some of these problems, today we have a very large on-prem footprint, right? Where we have multiple tier 3 data centers. We have the luxury of sitting within speed of light boundaries. There's some things that we have from a legacy point of view that have been an advantage to us. As we start moving to a hybrid cloud and a public cloud, and the reality is we will be in all of the spaces. There is no right answer other than being in all of them. We need to be able to be in geo-dispersed data centers. And the reality is when we look at a lot of the identity products, they work great in a single data center. They work great if you run them in isolation, but at the point where you got to run in multiple locations, multiple spots in the country, potentially multiple spots in the world, depending upon legal requirements, that became a challenge. And we use a term internally called being cloudy. And the reality is many of the applications that we're looking at, many of the tools simply aren't cloudy. They're client server-based technologies. A lot of them are, you know, based upon relational databases. Oracle, great database depending what you want to do. Absolutely not cloudy. So for us, it was talking to the vendors, how do you deal with session management? Ideally, you know, we need to minimize session because session kills. Those kinds of questions of what makes you cloudy, what makes you open and interoperable, because the reality is we're going to want to spin products in the future instead of a 10-year cycle every 2 or 3 years. It needs to be fairly open so that whether it's a refresh of the current product or a replacement product, that those things fit in more like building blocks, if you will.
Yeah, one of the things that made a difference for us was coming back to the technology aspect. That coming from a small higher ed kind of institution, we've only got a team of like 5 people, and they're spread between things like DNS and directory servers and identity management kind of way off over here on the side. We were really worried about retooling, retraining. So coming from an Oracle Directory Server kind of Enterprise Edition, the Ping kind of product, in this particular case, the Unbound ID Directory Server, felt like home. A lot of the commands and everything else, like, had a little different flow to it. But in general, same architecture. And one of the things that sold us is we were going through it, one of my senior guys turned to me and said, it's like everything we wanted baked into it, that everything we've asked for in the past was actually listened to. And as we went through it, that really was true. There's a lot of the components, like the CLI interfaces is a big one. But just the fact that I didn't have to go through and retrain people or switch to a different product. We considered switching everything over to Active Directory at that point, just saying, okay, we're just going to modify the schema, we'll push everything over into there. We also are a pretty heavy Active Directory shop, so why not? But then the relationship back, going through the Ping engagement was, have you really thought about this? Have you thought about that? These small little tweaks here and there along the way, the directory synchronization aspect, so that we didn't have to do some big flag waving days. We could have everything running and watch it for a while. Just literally watch it. What would happen if we had this running in production? Well, we did. We had it running in production class, and we would spot pick particular queries out and say, let's run it against the other system. Then we took our load balancer, switched it over so that we'd put 10% of the load onto the new Ping system running off that directory and watch them like a hawk. So we were able to do all that through this particular software package. And a lot of the Ping engagement helped us realize that, hey, yeah, we can do that slow. We don't have to do an all or nothing, and we don't have to have the flag waving day.
Yeah. For us, when we brought in Ping Federate, that implementation went pretty smoothly, pretty fast, and we got that up and running. So when we started looking for a WAM product, we wanted something that would integrate with Ping Federate easily and all the other stuff. And it kind of made it a no-brainer to Ping Access, because it just slipped right in there, and that was up and running in no time at all. So.
Awesome. So often with the legacy solution, you'll hear kind of bells going off. There's red flags kind of left and right, depending on what solution you have. But when it comes time to actually make the business case to the business and say, hey, this solution needs replacement, it can be kind of difficult to do that. So I'm curious, kind of the process that you went through to convince your peers and your colleagues that this was important. This is an initiative that we need to take, and we need to take it soon.
From an Optum point of view, it was pretty interesting because as a large company, we're as big as a lot of small governments, right? When you go look at it, you would think that would be a very long process. For us, this was actually surprisingly a fairly quick process. Our most recent purchase was the Ping Access purchase that we're going through right now. And we went out and had a conversation around resiliency, right? The availability topic. We want to start moving stuff from on-prem much more aggressively into a public cloud. We were able to come up with a very quick conversation with the CIO to say, here's some capabilities that we don't have today or we can't exploit to the level that we would like to. We can be much more agile. We came up with some examples of, literally my boss was sitting in a meeting with the CTO and CIO, and they were coming up with a business case. We weren't even there to sell the product, to sell a purchase. And they're like, hey, we'd like to do this, or we'd like to do that. And we're like, well, we're evaluating, Ping Access in this particular space. Oh, yeah, we could have solved that problem. Oh, yeah, we could do that today. Yeah, we could do that tomorrow. That's built in. And that conversation was actually incredibly quick with the CIO, and it actually accelerated the time frame. We weren't planning to make a purchase when we did. And literally, the business case that they had just in that conversation, he's like, I could pull the trigger on the order right now. It was something we were thinking about for next year. Walked out of the room and literally called an admin, and that was how the purchase started. Many of the capabilities and agility just made very clear business sense for us.
A lot of the same for us. In this particular case, the price point was able to hit and match what we were using for an existing directory solution. So we didn't really have that. It didn't feel like what we were doing was going off for a really advanced purchase for a much higher price tag. So it felt like not only, as I mentioned before, that it felt like a drop-in solution, but it had a drop-in price tag. And that with having the campus engagement coming out, showing us through, walking us through the actual install right there. One whole full day engagement was just show and tell. this is how we're going to do the install, this is how it all unpackages, we're going to leave it here for you guys to play around with it for a couple days. And that really made all the difference to the world, because we could see that that engagement was going to work well. It wasn't just like a closed box kind of product that was dropped off on your doorstep, figure it out on your own. It was very much that relationship building right from the very beginning. So that made a lot of the case automatically just, kind of built in for the modernization. And coming back again, just the enhanced protocols. We're looking for, the SCIM protocol, really looking to get people away from thinking about it as an LDAP protocol directory server and thinking of it as more of a generic term directory. It's more like white pages is the way I explain it to our business users. It's got a lot of information in there. It ranges from, IoT type device registrations with DNS, but nobody needs to know that. So the level of modernization for us was it crossed all of these kind of platforms. It was able to use all this different kind of data, dropping in different schemas. We are heavy in the ED person schema specification, and then getting the help going forward into SCIM. That wasn't something that we were going to have to research on our own. There was that engagement where we were able to reach out and say, hey, help us go through our schema, help us realize what we're doing wrong or what we need to do in the future. And it was just all right there. So it's just kind of like all the different use cases that we had lined up, matched up, and it was a real easy, slim, kind of installation, real easy to put in. And the last piece was just footprint. In this particular case, it is a much smaller footprint, not only in memory, but on disk. And that was a selling point for us because we just needed less hardware to run it. And at first, we were a little bit worried about the speed and the performance. That was one of those things where everybody said, oh yeah, it's really, really good, but we kind of wanted proof. So running it or whatever, one of the things that we came out with and what I used to sell it up the food chain is not only did it have that smaller footprint by about half, we were getting about 10 times the performance out of it, and we didn't even try to really optimize it. It's just kind of, we put all of our data in, we used the default configuration, and automatically it was just a lot faster right out of the box.
We're a small shop, so we've been lucky enough to be able to drive our own ship. So, we make the case, we see the deficiencies of the products, and we see what the users are complaining about. We see what the CIO is complaining about to us. And we take that and we find a product that kind of fits and integrates well with us and pitch it up, and pretty much we are able to get what we want. So we've been really lucky for the last couple of years. So not much business case fighting here.
One other note on that, we, because we're Unbound ID, very happy with that. We get the 4x performance gain, almost right away out of the chute without a whole lot of work on it. It was interesting in the ping access piece. We knew we were going to make a decision. We just weren't planning to make it that quick, and we actually had ping come in. We had someone help us do a quick lab, set up some use cases. We were up and running in a couple of days, and we actually brought in a bunch of business partners. We weren't planning on making a decision. We were kicking the tires for something down the road, and we literally were able to translate that into that CIO conversation a week later, and they're like, so are your partners on board? And literally the folks had already seen it and had ideas based upon that demo of, oh, it does X, it does Y. Self-service enablement, or automation, depending upon who you're talking to, that was a really big piece. But you mentioned the demo. That was a huge piece. That really cleared a lot of burdens out of the way to move fast.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Well, just wanted to thank our speakers. I think we're out of time. Thank you so much, and really appreciate it.